So we've been talking a bit about the best loadouts recently, meta loadouts in particular, and I've been having a blast with it. I've been diving back more into Warzone lately after taking some time away from it, and so far, it seems like you guys have been enjoying the meta loadout builds that we've talked about up until today. But today I wanted to switch it up. I wanted to talk today about the loadouts with the fastest times to kill, ensuring that you down or eliminate an enemy entirely in as fast a time as possible. What's the best weapons that you should be using to leave your enemies wondering, how in the world did he kill me that fast? This is a top 10 fastest killing loadouts in Warzone. As we go along, drop your thoughts down below. Are any of these regularly in your rotation of weapons that you rock in Warzone? Anything that you'll think you'll adopt and add to your armory, now seeing the cold hard data here for these builds? Whatever the case, drop your thoughts down below, but if you enjoyed the video, do me a favor and drop a like on it. And if you're new to the channel, do be sure to subscribe button to the video with all things Warzone, whether it be loadouts like this, tips and tricks, updates and information, as well as a ton of other stuff across the COD world like Modern Warfare 2 rumors, news, and updates, as well as retrospective looks at some of your favorite Call of Duty experiences of the past. We've got you covered with all of it, so if you guys would like to join the community, I'd love to have you. And finally, if you'd ever like to support the channel a little further, using creator code Espresso in the in-game shop of Warzone, Vanguard, Cold War, or Modern Warfare is a great way to do so. Again, entirely optional, so don't ever feel pressured to, but the option is there. That said, let's jump into it. First and foremost, some ground rules, some housekeeping items here. We're talking strictly TTK. As we'll mention, some weapons are definitely a bit more viable than others due to added bonuses in handling, mobility, mag size, and so on. And while some of these are mostly viable for regular use, the metric we're looking to at its core is the TTK. Some of these may not be your favorite weapons, and for good reasons. With fast TTKs and builds often comes a handful of harsh drawbacks to mitigate the usage, to make it a high risk, high reward design. Secondly, we're not talking about snipers or shotguns here. One shot potential is naturally the fastest of TTKs, but that does nobody any good if we're listing off a full list of 10 snipers or something like that. So for competitive integrity amongst weapon selection, we're withholding those. Thirdly, we'll be talking primarily about 250 health, because I see a lot of love recently for Rebirth by comparison to maybe not so much love for Caldera, but while we'll be talking about 250 HP, it's about a 1 to 2 shot difference on average, a few milliseconds difference in terms of that TTK. And finally, the data compiled and compared today comes from True Game Data's website. So listen, Tony's a great dude, and there's been a bit of recent competition in regards to raw stats from a new site that's popped up that pulls just data mine stats, but True Game Data's site, in my opinion, offers such a great wealth of visual knowledge, like the graphs likely in video here at this, and everything's hand tested. So big shout out and love to him. His link can be found in the description below to where you can go and build your own loadout and see how it compares. That said, number one here up on this TTK list, especially in terms of practicality, is the AS44, built as a sort of submachine gun here at this. Now, this is one we've talked about before in the past, but it will absolutely shred through your enemies. I'm sure that there's probably been a couple of clips already in the intro here where we just decimate our enemies, and it starts at a 449 millisecond TTK. Then it will drop to a fastest max of 491 milliseconds to 581 milliseconds, but that's at 18.6 meters. So a decent bit of distance still here to cover at that super fast range. As you'll see with a bunch of other weapons as we get further down this list, a lot of these aren't really built with distance in mind. So when you can have something like that you'll see with the AS44 and the next weapon we'll talk about, distance is huge in that benefit. So for this, you'd want to run the recoil booster, Empress Falcon A barrel, the slate reflector, skeletal stock, the hand stop, the 7.62 Gorenko 50 round magazine. I run hollow point for that added limb damage, the polymer grip, sleight of hand, and fully loaded. Next weapon up on deck, again, number 2 here in terms of practical TTK. I'm saying practical TTK because there is a gun that does beat out the base TTK here of both of these and everything going forward, but it's not really the best outside of point blank. Literally everywhere else it falls well short of the other weapons here. But number 2, the ASVAL. This ends up coming in with an initial TTK of 475 milliseconds, and then will drop down to still 568 milliseconds at 40.3 meters. So this thing, like we talked about with the AS44, it is very tough to get something that carries that fast a TTK over distance, and that's insane. Now, the drawbacks, of course, with the ASVAL, as we've talked about since its introduction, is the fact the max ammo you end up having is 30 rounds. It's phenomenal for solo play, but outside of that, if you're going to be challenging 1 or 2 or 3 other players total, you're not really dealt the best hands with this weapon build. So for that, the weapon build that you want is the VLK 200mm OSA barrel, the Merc foregrip, the 30 round magazine, the TAC laser, and the skeletal stock. So that is one that is insane and would highly recommend playing again if you're jumping into, say, maybe Rebirth Resurgence solos. Try that out. Now, next, we're going to talk about one that is very situational. The MP40 is actually, believe it or not, still up close one of the fastest TTK weapons. Now, the standard builds that we've talked about here beforehand doesn't really cut it. Instead, you really got to play close quarters with this. Coming in with a point-blank TTK of 484 milliseconds, and then at 12 meters, 518 milliseconds, that's where it's really going to come down to, again, close quarters and accuracy, because after that 12 meters, and even if you don't hit the multipliers that you need to, even at that 12 meters, that's not that far, you can drop that TTK down to 760 milliseconds. So a big drop off there in that regard. But to achieve the fastest killing potential with the MP40, you're going to want to use the recoil booster, the 189 millimeter short barrel. You're going to run the optic of your choice. Personally, I would run the ISO 1M iron sights for a little bit more added ADS speed, the folding stock, the pistol grip, the 7.62 Gorenko 45 round magazines, hollow point, polymer, unmarked, and quick. Again, MP40 has kind of fallen by the wayside in other builds, but this can still get the job done in its fastest TTK build. Now, next is the Type 100. Now, the Type 100 is one that is, again, very situational, very suited for close quarters, but in order to get that optimal TTK, you kind of have to build it for a build that isn't too great for, say, snappy ADS in close quarters. Achieving a point-blank TTK of 586 milliseconds, and then it only decreasing down to 610 milliseconds, it's honestly pretty solid for close quarters play, but then we'll see a sharp drop-off to 777 milliseconds at that same distance, again, if you're not hitting your multipliers, your upper body shots, or headshots. I've taken a liking to the Type 100 recently, actually, and have had quite a few engagements where I'm like, if I don't have something that is this fast a TTK, I don't win. But for this, run the recoil booster, the 374 millimeter barrel, slight reflector is my personal preference, though that's up to you, the skeletal stock, the 1941 hand stop, the 8 millimeter Kurz 48 round drum mag, that's where that extra damage will come into play, hollow point, the hatched grip to end up mitigating some of that kick and bounce that you have in your weapon, and then acrobatic as well as quick for your perks. Now, number 5 here in terms of the fastest TTK weapons, this one is a bit out of order, because technically speaking, coming back to that mention beforehand, this has the best TTK of any weapon we're talking about here today, but only if you base it off of point-blank engagements. Point-blank, the PPSH from Vanguard can achieve a TTK of an absurdly quick 447 milliseconds. This being with that hipfire build that we've seen in the past, and strangely, I think it was actually ground loot for some time. I don't remember if it still is or not, but that said, that TTK only lasts as something favorable until only 8.8 meters, which is not far at all. Then it will drop to an at-best TTK of 471 milliseconds, which is still absurdly quick, besting the AS44 and the ASVAL still, but if you don't hit your multiplier locations, you're going to drop that down to 570 milliseconds, and that's still only at 8.8 meters. And if you're using the hipfire build, you might not be hitting all of those multipliers, headshots, and upper body shots. To show just how much it drops off even further, just 3 meters further, not hitting those multipliers, you'll see that drop down to, at best, 676 milliseconds, and it'll cross that 700 millisecond mark around 20 meters. Now, obviously, it's not a one-to-one comparison, but guns like the DP27, they don't cross the 700 millisecond mark until 60 meters. The Vargo, 38 meters. Now, for this, you'll want to run the recoil booster, Kovaleskaia 230 millimeter barrel, slate reflector, remove stock, Carver foregrip, the Gorenko 71 round magazines, hollow point, fabric grip, fleet, and quick. Next, we're talking about, surprisingly, the Itra burst. This one we might breeze past because statistically speaking, it's up there, but in terms of ammo count, in terms of mobility, it's not really super favorable. Might be good for maybe, say, Rebirth Island, where you have a little bit more locations to dip into cover if you end up running out of ammo, or you need to just evade somebody and you're not out in the open like you would be in Caldera. This, though, ends up being able to achieve a TTK of 568 milliseconds and drops down to 621 milliseconds at 28.8 meters. Now, for this, I'd recommend the recoil booster, the Perfetto 140mm rapid barrel, slate reflector, the skeletal stock, the pistol grip, the 303 British 32 round magazines, lengthened, fabric grip, vital, and fully loaded. Now, after that, we're going to talk a little bit about the Cooper carbine. Now, not necessarily, though, in the way that we've talked about it before, because this, we're going to alter it based off of the TTK values. We want to make sure that we're prioritizing things like your fire rate. So in place of, say, an MX silencer like we've talked about before on other builds, you're going to want to run the recoil booster. Yes, it'll give away your position, but you'll be burning through your enemies, so does it matter? Then you also want to run the 14-inch Gracie rapid barrel, the Cooper 45 RS stock, the 1941 hand stop, the 9mm 60-round drum mag, lengthened, polymer grip, hard scoped, and fully loaded. After that, we're going to talk about one that is a little bit weird, the Owen Gun. We're putting this one a bit out of order again, but in reality, it's kind of around this location in the rankings. At its very best, the Owen Gun can kill in just a mere 472 milliseconds with the right build, which technically speaking makes it one of the fastest time to kill weapons in Warzone right now, only losing to things like the AS44 by a few milliseconds and that PPSH at point blank hitting everything perfectly. It's right up there with that ASVAL as well, just barely besting that, but once you get to 8.3 meters, it drops off big time. At that 8.3 meters, the best case TTK you can get is still an insanely fast 501 milliseconds. Again, still a top 4, top 5 TTK, but if you don't hit the multiplier locations, you at that same distance of only 8.3 meters will drop that down to 659 milliseconds. And then just 2 meters further, you don't hit those multipliers, that drops down to a cold TTK of 902 milliseconds. Almost an entire second of firing to secure that kill. So this is in here because, again, it has that potential, but otherwise, practical, it's a little bit rough. For this, though, recommend the recoil booster, Hawkinson Rapid Barrel, the M38 Slate 2.5 times custom optic, the Ravenwood stock, the hand stop, the Gorenko 72 round magazine, hollow point, polymer grip, acrobatic, and quick. Now, the final two we'll talk about here, number 9 and 10, are very, very similar. I'm talking a difference of only 7 milliseconds at their starting points, and they're relatively on the same drop-off trajectory up until you reach 38.6 meters. Number 9, though, being the AK-47 from Cold War. Coming in at a starting TTK of 600 milliseconds flat, the AK-47 is an insanely good choice here for your mid to long range play. While a lot of what we discussed already is more so suited towards that close quarters build, this is straight up great as is. The meta build that you'll normally run on this rifle is the standard build that you want for the TTK, the best TTK available. So same thing goes with the Vargo, which we'll talk about here in just a second, but for that AK-47, you'll want to run the GRU suppressor, Spetsnaz RPK barrel, axial arms 3 times optic, Spetsnaz grip, and the 60 round magazine. Now, that is something that, again, as for the Vargo, talking about that, just a 7 millisecond difference between the two. Coming in at a TTK starting of 607 milliseconds and basically having that same decay rate on the TTK as the AK outwards to the same point of 38.6 meters. The only difference is the TTK drops a bit more at that 38.6 meter distance. But honestly, a part of me would still very much so recommend the Vargo because it is that cross between the AK and the XM4. The damage and killing potential of the AK, but with the handling of the XM4 and minimal recoil. So damage plus easier to control, that's a yes in my books. For this, you'll end up wanting to run the GRU suppressor, Task Force barrel, axial arms 3 times optic, Spetsnaz grip, and the 60 round magazine. Now, that said, that's our top 10, but there are some honorable mentions here at this. Technically speaking, the FAL is still a top weapon. It starts at a 638 milliseconds, and honestly is a pretty solid across the board weapon. It doesn't hit that 700 millisecond threshold until the 60 meter mark, so a long range there that it's still a very fast killing weapon, but it's dependent on your trigger finger and accuracy. The OTS-9 is still there, but only out to 7.4 meters, so basically point blank. Even at that 7 meter range, if you miss your shots, it'll bring it down to a 714 millisecond TTK. Same with the Cold War MP5. That's something that, honestly, it's got a really nice initial TTK of 562 milliseconds point blank, and that can go to 577 milliseconds, but only outwards of 8.6 meters. Then it's entirely dependent on if you place your shots or not, because after that, you'll drop to a 717 milliseconds, which is, like the OTS, an absurd drop-off. And I know everyone's going to be like, oh, but the brand. And really, it's not that great in terms of TTK. It starts at 651 milliseconds, which isn't terrible, but that's point blank. It's constant, sure, not dropping off below that 700 millisecond mark until 40 meters, but realistically, it's not in the top 10 for starting and highest killing potentials in terms of that TTK. Plus, also, stop using the brand. How are you not bored with it? Anyways, that's the top 10 TTK weapons here right now within Warzone. Let me know your thoughts down below. Are you guys going to be using any of these weapons? Are you already? Whatever the case, drop it down below. But if you enjoyed the video, it helped you out at all, found it insightful, drop a like on the video. And if you're new to the channel, hit the subscribe button so you don't miss a single thing regarding all things Warzone and anything COD related. I'd love to have you in the community, so if you guys are interested, hit the subscribe button. That said, thanks so much for watching. My name is Espresso. I'll see you guys later. Take care, and peace.